Hi there, I'm Luke Clements, one of your co-hosts of the Better Events podcast. And in this episode, I am so excited, as we always say every single week, but especially excited this week because we are interviewing someone who is near and dear to my heart and someone who I've worked a number of events with. And that is my brother, Luke Clements. He is a virtual event technician and streaming engineer. And we have worked on so many events together that I figured it was time to bring him in, sit down with him and Mary, and just talk about what he does and the value that he brings to event teams, both virtual events as well as hybrid. And if you're an event planner, or maybe even just you're thinking about hosting an event and unsure about how you can take that next step to elevate your virtual live stream component, this episode's for you. He's breaking down exactly what his role is, what's possible, and also shares some common mistakes that clients make when it comes to live streaming or virtual events.
Welcome to the Better Events podcast. Join two event strategists, Logan Clements and Mary Davidson, who believe we can all create, host, and attend better events. In this podcast, you will learn about event strategy and actions that you can use today as an event host, planner, or manager. Hear directly from the people who are creating innovative and inspiring events today and tomorrow, and grow your business along the way. Now, let's get started, and thanks for listening to the Better Events podcast.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Better Events podcast. We are so excited to be with you this week, and we are joined by an awesome guest who we're going to introduce. Before we do, so our topic for today is what is a virtual event technician / streaming engineer? And so if you are already confused by that title, please stick around. This is absolutely for you. It's going to be an episode full of lots of learnings. So I have the pleasure of introducing our guest. And once again, don't forget, though, we do have our co-host here with us, Logan Clements. And so, Logan, why don't you just say hello really quick? How's it going?
Hi, everyone. And Mary, I'm very self-conscious about our how's it going after our episode about asking better questions, but
how's it going?
It's going.
We could get deep right off the start if you want.
Sure, we totally could. We usually do icebreakers, but I do want to save as much time for our guest, Luke Clements, my fun fact, who's my brother and a streaming engineer, and we're excited to have him on the pod. Mary, do you want to introduce him?
Yeah, absolutely. So Luke is a freelance virtual event producer, video editor, and streaming engineer who is passionate about helping organizations create and stream entertaining virtual events. Luke produces video content and runs the virtual event live stream for organizations like the Washington State Small Business Fair, which Logan and I have the pleasure of also being involved in, the Brooklyn Synagogue, and USAID.
USAID. You got it.
Okay. And hold on. Okay. I can redo that. Can I just redo that for the podcast? Dang it.
I thought it was, I thought that was good. Let's leave it in.
Oh my gosh.
Luke, is there anything else you want to add to that lovely bio?
No. I mean, I can list clients, all day long, but yeah, we got, I've been, streaming engineering and being a virtual event tech for, I guess it's now like 3 years. I did kind of like the in-person technician side of things, a bit before the pandemic. And then, when everybody else pivoted, I pivoted as well and began doing it in the virtual space.
I feel like, Luke, I get the pleasure of, because we're related. I know you do other things outside of virtual events as well. What else do you do outside of events?
Sure. Outside of events, I am also a comedian and performer, and I will do that in my free time. I also do some in-person work at theaters located in New York City, the only city in the world. That's what I do between working different events and projects that way, and performing and doing comedy stuff on the side. That's pretty much my whole life.
Yeah. Well, I think that's just, I wanted you to say that because I feel like that adds a layer to your job, because you're coming from this theater performance background that really helps in your role as being the streaming engineer, because you, I feel like, bring a different skill set to the table than folks that might have just been in events the entire time. But one of the reasons why we asked you, one, you are my brother, which I love. And I love that we've gotten to work together in the last couple years because you've gotten into virtual events. And I think you come to it from such a different, I've been doing events for a number of years, so you're fresher into the business. But again, I feel like your perspective's so fresh, and the skills that you've transitioned from what you've been using for live streaming like video games into this now. You've done corporate events, nonprofits, kind of everything under the sun, I think is such an interesting story. But I feel like let's start at the beginning with, how would you describe, Luke, what does a virtual event technician, streaming engineer, what do you actually do?
Yeah. So, in terms of a streaming engineer in any virtual event, if you're hoping to live stream whatever you're doing, so you want it to go out on YouTube or Vimeo or Facebook Live or what have you, you need somebody who is going to be sending that feed off into the internet before it can, turn into something people can watch. As a streaming engineer, I typically use Open Broadcaster software, OBS, which allows me to kind of compile what different feeds I might have if I'm grabbing a feed from maybe a Zoom call or the like, where I'm capturing a speaker, and I can add that in on top of any graphics that might need to be overlaid on what they're saying, or pre-recorded videos that may need to roll. All of those different scenes and looks and everything can be stored in OBS, and then through OBS sent out to the feeds that they're going to. Whatever you end up streaming with can be sent out there. So the streaming engineer's job is usually closely tied to whoever the show caller is. Of you're stepping through a run of show, making sure everything that you want the people to see at the front end rather, is all coming together in the back end, and appearing at the right times. The only distinction between that and a virtual event technician is typically I'll use that title when nothing's being streamed. Sometimes I will do events that don't go out anywhere. Maybe they're just a highly produced Zoom meeting or the like. So everything lives within Zoom. It's not actually streaming anywhere, but I'm still helping do perhaps some of the things that other backstage managers might do, like spotlighting people. I can, again, through OBS, I can push different video feeds into Zoom through OBS and that sort of thing. And yeah, that's kind of what I'm doing. I'm just juggling different videos and pictures and sending them which in what place.
Sounds so simple and concise, but
It's easy.
It's easy. No, to have someone like Luke on the team for events is like crazy awesome. I think it just creates like a whole other level of a virtual event. And we were talking in a previous episode about or excuse me, we will talk in upcoming episodes about Zoom tips and tricks and all those wonderful things about Zoom events. And so this to me goes hand in hand with that, because to utilize someone who's in a role like you've been explaining really amplifies the experience and the type of event that you can create in Zoom, for example. So lots we can unpack, lots of places that you can use it in. But you spoke about OBS. So can you just touch a little bit more on how you started with this in general, and then how you started, or when you first started working with OBS?
Yeah, first started working with OBS on kind of a personal project side, in which I was streaming to Twitch, like the kind of video game streamer thing you may have seen before. And so I learned it just kind of on my own time. And I do think it is pretty accessible to anyone who is hoping to learn it. It's open source, so it's free. And as a process of getting ready to stream myself, I kind of ended up then having kind of the full repertoire of OBS that happens to coincide exactly with what virtual event stuff needs. And so my first actual gig in virtual events was a referral from someone who just knew that I was streaming, and so I knew things about how streaming works, and referred me to a synagogue they knew that was trying to make their services virtual. And so one thing led to another. In terms of learning OBS in like actual like minutia detail, I first started by just clicking open the program and screwing around. You can kind of just like click around, and I think a lot of the interface is fairly straightforward. But there's also a ton of tutorials and video guides on YouTube and elsewhere, which I also found very helpful.
Yeah, I think this is always so funny, where how you got started, because I remember being in a call with an agency back like right after COVID had hit. It was in the summer of 2020, and having somebody tell me, "Oh yeah, for anyone who knows this program OBS, they're never going to have a trouble getting a job ever. Like this is we need people who know how to do this, to who have that virtual skill, because everyone's going virtual or live streaming, or even just being able to have like just everything up that level." And I remember going, "Oh, write it down. I'll Google OBS and teach myself." And I think I downloaded the program and opened it up and then was like, "Yeah, this is really tough." So
Same.
I was like, "Luke, I think you know this program, don't you?" And you were like already doing, I think, your synagogue work and everything.
Yeah.
And I know it has been something that you can definitely, it's accessible. Like you said, you could teach yourself, but as a event manager, producer, planner, I know I feel a lot more confident having somebody who has experience doing it versus
Yeah.
teaching it, to myself. Because you can just have so much more, you have more experience on it. But what are your tips for an event host or a planner who's like thinking about live streaming their event?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is you're kind of figuring out like, oh, I want this event to be live streamed, is you need to understand your scale and like your final aim. Like if I'm hoping to live stream this, where am I hoping to live stream this? Do I want this going on YouTube or Vimeo or Twitch, or just to a few exclusive private donors who need to see it on the back end, or something like that? Because that will affect a lot of what your tech flow is going to look like. And I think that's probably the main thing you need to be focusing on as you're coming up with your live streaming plan is, where are the feeds coming from? Where are they going to? Where are they ending up at the very end? So you're going to need cameras on site if you have an in-person component. If not, you need to make sure everyone who you want appearing has a camera and has a functional one. You need a way for all those things to be captured. Frequently, a lot of events I've been doing lately have been doing that as just like a Zoom call, as a way to get all the feeds to the streaming engineer. And then you'll likely need a streaming engineer who is going to be able to kind of compile a bunch of different things, package them all up in a program like OBS, and then send it off to the place that you want your live stream to go. But yes, I think scale is a big part of that. You can live stream without a streaming engineer in certain cases, like if you do not need a very produced look at the end. Perhaps you don't have the budget for it, or you don't have the manpower in order to, say, stream a Zoom call. If you want, you can just go live within the Zoom client itself, and you won't need a second application of any sort. Downside of that, you have a lot less control over what it's going to look like at the end. It's going to have that Zoom watermark on it in the corner, that kind of thing. So you can have kind of less produced and less involved productions that are also live streamed. But figuring out what that kind of scale is and what your budget is and all that kind of thing, I think is probably your most important first steps.
And I think for our listeners too, what I always describe your role sometimes in projects is like you're a switcher, like the video
Mhm.
switcher, that you're taking in all these inputs and then you're controlling what we can see. And like in an example would be if a speaker, all of a sudden their internet crashed or they're on mute and we can't get their attention, you have the ability to throw a slide up and play some background music while we get that person reset. versus, like you're saying, for that more control, versus if you're just streaming without that extra layer of a streaming engineer with your software, we're at the mercy of getting that person unmuted and everyone seeing that person, troubleshoot and try to figure it out. So that's another thing that I know I like with giving tips, that I think adding, like, it is more resources to have a streaming engineer on as you're part of your team, but it also just gives you an extra layer of, backup plans. We have a whole episode, I feel like, where we talked about contingency planning, but like it always makes me feel better than when we try to kind of DIY it without somebody.
Yeah, that I think, yeah, if you're familiar with TV production at all, or a lot of kind of in-person events with camera feeds, would have a switcher, like in person, hop in between feeds. A streaming engineer could also be described as, yeah, like a one-person studio who is taking all your graphics, your videos, your feeds, and coming up with what the end goal will look like with those.
Yeah, and I will say too, just like quick shout out to Luke, because this, I mean, you kind of mentioned if people want to do it simply themselves, there are ways that they can do it. But to use someone who's a streaming engineer or virtual event technician, there really is a ton of value in it. There is, because you can provide this. I think it's a better produced event, and then also, especially on the virtual event technician side of things, it's someone like yourself who's well versed with the tech, and that for me is just like a tremendous amount of peace of mind because Logan and I have taught ourselves so much, but to be able to have somebody who actually really understands it and can speak to issues that might arise is just super valuable. So definitely there's two levels, I think, of an event that an event planner or host could put on, and to have someone in a role like yours is kind of an amplified experience. So just wanted to touch on that.
Yeah,
As
I
well.
definitely have also kind of like doubled as a technical director a lot of times in my work as a technician. You'd think I would just be like pulling the levers and pushing the buttons, but in a lot of cases, if there isn't a technical director already staffed on an event, I'm probably also going to be consulting and like giving advice on like what the structure of the show should look like in order to best facilitate a live stream.
I feel like too, Luke, in your roles that you've been in, that you've probably learned a lot as far as like what you've seen happen in events. And so what are some common mistakes that you've seen people make at virtual events?
I think with anything virtual, I mean, we've mentioned it several times, but contingency plans are a big thing. I think people not having, the backups ready, especially when you've got, one perhaps not tech savvy speaker who's coming on last minute, and we haven't had the time to have a phone call with them or a video call tech check with them ahead of time. So they're a big question about whether they're going to be able to get on in time and that kind of stuff. And not having a contingency of like, what if that speaker cannot get on at all? Like, what if they completely have vanished? And that sort of thing. And knowing how you're going to be able to adjust plans or put up holding slides or interstitial, videos or something to fill that gap, and just being ready for any one piece to maybe fall away and still know, what you're going to do. I think the other mistake that I have seen probably people make with virtual things is trying to step into technologies and maybe like softwares that they're not super comfortable with or they don't have a lot of experience with. I've been on events. I think one of them was with Logan, at least, of an online platform that is not performing the way that it maybe was quoted to you whenever you paid for it for your big conference or summit or something like that. And in that case, also having contingencies of like, maybe that website you had someone make for you isn't working completely right. Do we have a backup Vimeo link or YouTube link that we can stream to instead and send participants to in case something gets borked, on that end?
When something breaks in the internet, I feel like, I mean, again, it's why I love what we do, but I think it's really valuable then having your brain on that, where you're able to think through those contingency plans. Do you have any pet peeves when it comes to what people are doing in virtual. I feel like I could name one, which is you
Sure.
getting last minute slides.
I was going to say last minute anything. I think people with slides are the biggest offenders consistently. That someone with a slideshow was up till 2 a.m. the night before the event and they were making rapid changes to it. And then they're trying to send me the new slides that they have an hour before they're supposed to speak. I'm currently actively queuing a show right now. I can't. It's a pain for me to download your slides and ingest them into OBS, like all that sort of stuff last minute. Yes, I think other like and kind of wrapped in with like mistakes you can make for virtual things is to understand that there is a lead time for all those things, for all those pieces being ready. You're going to have to kind of work into your work back more time for testing the tech setups, making sure you have all the assets and pre-recorded things, all those things before day of or week of and all that sort of stuff.
Mary, we could totally do an episode on work backs. I think that's like, I mean, that's for me when I first started, I know it was so crucial, Luke. Like you're saying, everything relies on each other. So it's one person's like, but it's just me and my slides. And it's like, no, but your slides were put into this program, which has to go this person. And then we have to test it. And you're like, so really, you can't give it the day before. You know, you have to give it 2 weeks ahead of time so we can test these things. And just how important all of that is versus just throwing it together.
Totally. Yeah. And I have a random question for you, Luke. I was just curious. So, so the roles that you're typically doing for these scenarios is you're virtual. And so you're located in New York City, right? And so Logan and I are in Seattle. You can be in New York City when we're doing events and it's all great. We can still do events together. I was curious though. So Logan and I talk about this fairly often. When an event is over and you have that like post-event celebration, it's a harder thing to be able to accomplish in a virtual event. And because you're like extremely virtual and farther away, I just want to know, how do you celebrate when you finish an event?
Yeah, I am almost exclusively remote in this job. So yes, I do not have a chance to go out and grab beers with the rest of the event team after something goes down. I think usually I just step away from my computer. That like in most instances for a virtual event, I've probably been sitting in front of my computer with only brief breaks for 6 hours or whatever. So yeah, just I will stand up and I will go to my kitchen and like probably
just take a
eat,
minute. Yeah.
pet the cat, all that stuff.
Oh yeah, Mary, he's got a kitten.
Yeah. I was wondering if the cat was going to make an appearance during the podcast, honestly.
Cross our fingers. You never know.
She's locked out of the recording studio.
Oh, God.
She stays in the hall.
Do you have a favorite event that you've worked so far, Luke?
I don't know. I feel like all my favorite events are just the ones where nothing goes wrong.
That's fair.
That's the dream for me, is just an event in which everybody showed up on time, they got in all their assets, and they make the whole thing low stress for me. I'm fine juggling a bunch of things that come up, and inevitably there's always some minor fire or emergency in any event. But yes, there's something very relieving about being able to not have much to decompress from after an event ends.
I'll take it. And I think too, just for our listeners, I think it's really important, like your role, sometimes you're client facing, sometimes you're not until kind of closer to the event days, which I know is you kind of like, you're more internal until we're in the event week per se. But that is something I try to, when I'm working with you, Luke, or other people who do similar things to you, like I am always constantly working on how I can better advocate for you to avoid some of those pet peeves of last minute changes and managing client expectations of, hey, if we get this within 3 days of the event, we're going to do our best, but I can't guarantee it's going to work, because I think in the early days of you and I working together, Luke, I'm pretty sure I did change the tech setup on you like the night before an event. The event day we appeared and like there were less people in the room than I told you, and you had to rebuild your whole show. And I felt awful about it. And I would not like to have that feeling again for you or for me. So thinking about that too, if you're listening to this as a planner, that this isn't, again, this is somebody that you want to kind of protect in those conversations, but is also like a really good resource. Like you're saying, Luke, as a tech director, you kind of know what you need now, especially now that you've been doing it a couple years, and what information you need when, how long it takes for things to happen. But my other advice too, if you're a producer, is like ask questions. I love asking Luke, like, is this possible? Before I say yes to a client. And it's fun trying new things and figuring it out. So I always say that I don't know the OBS, like how to push the right buttons to do the right thing at the right time. But I do know some of the limitations. And I only know that because I ask questions, because I'm asking you, Luke, like, is this possible? And I do appreciate, because you always come to the table of like, let me look at it. I'm going to figure it out. And sometimes it's like, okay, no, if it's not, if we don't know, we don't do it. But do you have any advice for someone who is inspired by what you're talking about today and wants to learn how to do what you do?
I think, as I kind of mentioned earlier, probably the best thing you can do is download OBS and figure out how it works. I think OBS is a great entry point. It is, as I said, free. And additionally, since it's open source, there's a bunch of easy documentation online. There's a bunch of tutorials, all the kinds of things you would need to actually like get the know-how under your belt to feel like you can do an event. There are other programs you could learn. There are like, because OBS is open source, there are a couple like kind of spin-offs of it, like Streamlabs OBS or OBS.live, those kinds of things, which are, once you know OBS, those ones are pretty much straightforward. They're just like reskins of OBS. It's all the same buttons, but they maybe look a little different. They've moved a bit, but it has all the same functionality. Additionally, there's like vMix if you want an even bigger step, but again, that's an upfront cost. You do have to pay for it, and it's a lot more involved. I think OBS is a good place to start. And then just start trying to do events. The best, I think, a great way to learn is by doing. Obviously, you can always try to start with something pretty simple. But just having that ability to like kind of troubleshoot and figure out a solution for something you weren't anticipating and all that sort of stuff, I think is pretty crucial as a streaming engineer. For knowing that someone's like, oh, I have these slides, but they're not normal. I don't have them as a PDF or a slideshow. Instead, they're a dynamic browser link. And you're like, okay, well, I guess I've never encountered this before. How will I figure out how this works? And being able to kind of like Google and find the answer if someone else has already experienced this problem, and all those sorts of things. That just kind of like comes as you learn it. I don't know. I feel like it is akin to programming, if you ever have done that before. Not that you require any programming knowledge in order to be a streaming engineer, but that the method in which you learn seems very similar. You get the basics, and then as things come up that you need to know, you learn that new bit. So you're constantly learning all the new little niches and tricks.
There's definitely an entry point. Just dive in, figure it out, and then you'll figure the rest out as time goes on.
Yeah,
totally. And if someone, like we're talking about the people who might be interested in learning more about this, I'm curious, what does your home office and like tech setup look like? Like what's required to do this role? And what I really want to know too is, do you have multiple monitors?
Yes, I have multiple monitors, and I would say that is 100% a necessity. Yes, I have done work as like a virtual tech on my laptop when absolutely necessary without an external monitor. It makes everything harder. Yes, I currently have 2 monitors. I know of other techs who have even more, who might have 3 or 4 for whatever needs they have. But yes, as someone who's working like a studio and like switching between feeds and such, it's very helpful to be able to have a separate screen in which like that's, say, maybe monitoring just what is going out to the stream right now, or one that's just the Zoom call that I'm grabbing feeds from, because that will make your life a whole lot easier, having everything kind of delineated in spaces that can be grabbed easily by OBS and all that sort of stuff. I am on a PC. I'm a hardcore PC user. I believe in them. Macs, I suppose, are good for some things. but they're far less customizable and easy to
Fighting
get
words
them
with
to run.
Logan.
Oh no, he's been trying to get me to be a PC user for years.
Have I?
He hasn't
have
been
I?
able to get me off my Macs, but he sings the praises. You also, Luke, you built your own computer, didn't you?
I did indeed. I did build my own PC. I would say yes. In addition to having 2 monitors, having a rather beefy computer is also an important step. If you've already got like a modern gaming rig or something like that, you probably have all the specs you need. But streaming in OBS, same with kind of like video editing work, which I also do, is pretty intensive on your computer. So you're going to want some kind of modern CPU and GPU that can handle the compressing and compiling videos on the fly, and then also sending them somewhere, which can get pretty tough. If you don't know if your system can handle it, you can always just run some test streams. You can download OBS and try putting some stuff together and streaming it. And OBS has a lot of great like metrics in it of like, are you dropping frames? Is it stuttering? Has your stream been lagging or something like that? And that can tell you if your computer's maybe not up to par. And then finally, you need internet. And it needs to be hardlined.
How far is that Ethernet cable?
I have a 50-foot Ethernet cable that runs from my computer all the way across our apartment to the very far end where our router is, so I can be directly connected in. But that is the only way you can get the reliability and speed that you really need. You gotta be hardline.
Yeah, and we've learned there's contingency plans for internet. So you live and die by your internet speed, I feel like, with virtual and hybrid as we move forward. Well, Luke, is there anything else you want to add?
Not that I'm thinking of. Thank you very much for having me. It's been a joy.
Oh, you're not done yet. I do want to do these
what's left?
Quick sentence finishers with you.
Yeah.
If I had more hours in the day, I would
sleep more.
Fair.
It's a very common answer. I feel that.
Yeah.
It's a good answer. What about your favorite productivity tool is?
Google Calendar. Keep you on time, and also it also helps a lot to block out if you've got things you need to do, like blocking out the time ahead of time.
You do time blocks. Yeah. I've heard good things about that. Last one here. Something you're looking forward to this year, whether it's in business or personal, is?
I'm thinking of I'm thinking of personal stuff. I'm thinking of video games that are coming out.
That's fine.
That's all I ever think about is what's on the horizon. Looking forward to
particular game?
Overwatch 2 beta is coming out later this month.
Very exciting.
Nice.
Awesome. Well, where can listeners find you, Luke?
You can find me at itslukeclements on practically everything. That's the best way to connect.
Yeah, we'll link to
if you need me.
We'll link to your Linktree and everything in our show notes. But yeah, give him a follow, especially if you're a Twitter user. Luke won't toot his own horn, but I think he's got some pretty funny tweets in there if you need a laugh. And you can follow along with his gaming on Twitch. So we'll put all those links in the chat. Thank you, Luke. I really appreciate having you here.
Thank you. Appreciate being here. Thanks, Logan. Thanks, Mary.
Thanks so much.
And I think that brings us to our bonus tip, Mary, which is coming from you this week.
Yes, awesome. Okay, so my bonus tip for today is encouraging you to find a professional organization within the event industry that fits your needs that you could join. I myself and Logan have recently joined MPI, Meeting Professionals International, which has been something that has fit our needs, especially with our local chapter. We enjoy that so far. And so there are many out there. There are so many different associations and organizations. So they're a really great way to network and to find a business. So just hop around, if nothing else, attend some of their local meetings and see what works for you. But my bonus tip for today is just to find a professional association organization that you can join.
But thanks so much. That brings us to the end of our episode. You can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Better Events Pod. Send us an email at bettereventspod@gmail.com. And as always, we appreciate you for listening, and we'll be back in your feeds again next Wednesday.
Thank you.